The first thing that welcomed me home was a gate that didn't recognize the sound of my boots. The iron swung inward a few inches, stiff with rust at the hinges, then stopped with a groan as if even the house had learned to say no. 20 years is long enough for a pair of hinges to seize up and a name to fall out of a family's mouth. I worked the metal back and forth, feeling the familiar tug in tendons that weren't used to doing anything without someone watching. Prison teaches you to move quietly, to be patient, to let time do some of your work. Rust softens if you coax it. When it didn't budge, I put my shoulder to it, and the gate scraped a brown crescent into the concrete. The sound bit into the quiet of their street. The house stood behind a line of oleanders that had grown tall and tall. They used to be my mother's pride. Now a few brown leaves hung like finished prayers. The porch light was on, but it was the wrong kind of warm. LED instead of the old yellow bulb that had lured our moths and me for entire childhood summers. The front door had a new lock, a satin nickel deadbolt that looked like it had nothing to prove. In my pocket, I had a single key that belonged to a life the world thought I killed. I set it on my tongue without thinking, tasting brass and memory, then put it back. Keys are honest. They either fit or they don't. The lock that waited for me in the nickel deadbolt was made by someone who had never heard of me. So I knocked. Through the glass inset, I could see the hallway light, the framed photos climbing the stair. In those frames, my family had frozen every birthday, every triumph, and, apparently, every year after I went away. I waited to see if my face still hung on that wall with the others. The glass reflected black. Footsteps approached with a kind of confident caution that had learned itself over decades of safe living. Then the door opened, and a man who looked like me in 10 years frowned. "Can I help you?" he said. I knew my brother by the little scar where I had busted him with a fishing lure when we were kids. It tugged his mouth a fraction when he was serious. That scar tugged now, a signpost to a person who had moved on. He had my father's shoulders and the house's keys. I said his name. "Harris." He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He tilted his head as if I'd mispronounced it. "Sorry?" "It's me." I said my own name, an old syllable that used to mean son, brother, problem, promise. "I'm home." His eyes moved across my face the way you read a street you don't want to be walking. He came to the end without finding his turn. "I think you have the wrong house." He started to close the door, gentle but practiced, and my hand went to the jamb. Fingers remember a house even when a house refuses to remember fingers. "Where's Ma?" I said. He pushed harder. "Listen, you need to go." I had been ready for a hug or a punch. I hadn't trained for bureaucracy. "Where's Ma?" I repeated, softer. "Harris, where's—" A woman's voice came from the hall. "Who is it?" My brother's head turned. "Just someone who's lost. I'll handle." She came into view with a dish towel over her shoulder, the motion of wiping hands still happening. She was younger than Harris by a decade, hair tied up careless, the confident glint of someone who had the final say in most rooms she walked into. Her eyes rolled past me, registered a stranger, sharpened. "Everything okay?" she said. Then she placed me in some category I didn't like. "Sir, we don't buy anything at the door." "I'm not selling." I tried to smile. It felt like a mouth learning to walk. "I'm the opposite." Harris shifted to block me. "We've asked you to leave." "Where's Ma?" I said again, not because I thought I'd get a different answer, but because I wanted to see what their faces did when the words slid past their teeth. They did nothing. The door pushed closed until the latch clicked, and my question stood on the porch alone. The funny thing about prison is you come out with two clocks, one you wear on your wrist and one you wear under your skin. The porch light felt wrong, the lock felt wrong, and now my own name felt wrong when I said it to the quiet. The night had the same crickets, but a different rhythm. I stepped off the porch and walked the path I'd helped pour concrete for when our father was still alive. I'd smoothed it with a trowel, drawn a tiny sun in the corner before he swore and told me it wasn't our property to sign. I looked for that sun now, for any mark that said I existed. There was only a hairline crack, a thin map from one world to the next. At the side of the house, I found the old water tap, the one that had always leaked. It still did, a dime of water bright on concrete. Some things refuse to forget how to be themselves. I crouched and put my fingers into the cool and leaned my head against the stucco, breathing shallow, because inside the house, where my brother's shoes were walking and a woman I didn't know was hanging up a towel, there were voices that talked around a hole in their family. I didn't want to cry in the dark beside my own house like a kid left behind at a mall, but the sound came anyway. A little animal that had waited 20 years and finally found where to scratch its way out. When I put that animal back where it lived, I stood. Behind the lattice, beneath the side porch, my father and I had built a compartment, no bigger than a suitcase, for things we didn't want stolen when the neighborhood was young and eager. Nobody but family knew it was there. It was where we hid birthday bikes and Christmas surprises, where my brother and I stored fireworks the one summer we wanted to be interesting. I pulled the lattice aside. The compartment door we had built was still there, a plywood panel with a U-shaped cutout my father had sawn so our fingers could fit. My fingers fit. I tugged. It resisted, then gave with a small sticky noise. Inside, behind two paint cans and a deflated soccer ball, sat a shoebox. On the lid, my father had written in marker, "Spare." I took it out and set it on the ground. The tape had turned the color of tea. I lifted an edge with my nail and peeled, slow, coaxing like I had with the gate. My hand shook in a way that made me hate them. Inside lay a mess of old brass keys, a dried-out tube of silicone lube, a folded piece of paper, and a lockpick set I'd made from windshield wipers when I was 19 and thought that skill made me clever. The picks were black with age. I felt like I was touching a younger version of myself that had been left behind with everything else. The paper was a floor plan of the house. My father's blocky writing marking the surprise compartment and the locations of good studs, places you could hang something heavy and trust it. It included codes for what the family used to call the boys' safe, a press and twist you could do in the upstairs closet panel that opened it to reveal a tiny cubby where we had stored my baseball cards and later, after trouble found me, the last of my cash. I told the parole officer I had no money. It wasn't a lie. A 20-year-old cubby is basically a time capsule, not a bank. I pocketed the folded plan, then used the old silicone to coat the pick shafts. A deadlock is a simple truth, a cylinder with fewer illusions than a man. I slid the picks into my sleeve and circled to the back door, which we had replaced with a solid core slab when I was a sophomore because I had split the old one by slamming it in a hurry. The new slab had a half-moon window at the top and words etched near the handle that promised security, like fortune cookie glass. The mechanism clacked when I tested it. I listened to the house, the murmur of a television upstairs and something simmering on the stove, My stomach tightened at the smell of tomatoes and cumin. The first rule of picking a lock in your own home is to take your time. The second is to never do it like a thief. Haste alters a hand. I bent my head to the keyway and counted the pin stacks by feel, the way a blind person counts stairs. Click, click, click. When I turned the plug, I didn't push the door. I just stood with my forehead against it, breathing. Then I eased it open into that familiar cool of tile and detergent and the wisp of a whole life gone on without me. I stepped inside. The kitchen had been remodeled. We used to have brown laminate counters with a seam that collected breadcrumbs like a hobby. The new counters were white, edged, and a sharp profile that said someone leafed through magazines before choosing them. I stood to leave and almost knocked a book from the shelf. I caught it. Home Safe, Protecting What Matters. The kind of guide you buy when you decide to take ownership of your safety. I flipped it open. A receipt slipped out. On it, a note in Horace's hand. Code Mom's Pass, underlined. People reuse passwords. They feed their lives into the same short, hungry boxes. I looked around. Where would my mother have written a password that this family would remember without wanting to? On our piano, there had been post-its of small tunes she wanted to practice. On our old phone, a card with important numbers in my father's wallet. On my mother's desk when she did grades, a password list stuck inside a folder she pretended was temporary. If Aisha replaced the piano with zoning maps, she'd have also inherited my mother's caution. I tried the desk drawers. In the second, under a tray with paperclips, lay a thin address book that had survived technology by sheer stubbornness. I thumbed through. Under M, Mum, email pass, peonies 3. The handwriting was my mother's. She loved peonies, despite how fussy they were. I typed 73636473 just in case she had converted letters to numbers on a second attempt. Denied. I went with peonies 3. The safe accepted the code with a modest beep, like someone polite clearing their throat. Inside were passports, property papers, a folder labeled insurance, and a small padded envelope with my name on it. My hands forgot not to shake. The envelope contained a key on a brass ring and a note. Habib. The handwritten word fell on me like a rope ladder. I sat on the floor. The note was short. My mother's letters walking back toward me across white paper like she was meeting me halfway down a long road. If you are reading this, you found the boys safe. That means you will find everything else. They wanted to erase you to protect what they made in your absence. I didn't fight them because grief made me tired. I will not be here to help you, but I have laid the thread. Trust your hands. They know the house. Trust the old places. They know you. The key opens the storage on 3rd and Alder, Unit 22. There is truth in it. If you can forgive me, come to the house on Friday at 2 p.m. If you cannot, burn this and keep walking. Mom. I read it twice, then a third time, then pressed it to my face like it had a smell I needed. Friday at 2 p.m. It was Wednesday now. The house on Friday. Whose house? This house or another? My mother's note made assumptions we shared a list we no longer did, but the storage unit I understood. Footsteps in the hall. I put the note and key inside my jacket and shut the safe. I relocked the desk drawer and replaced the rug. I unlocked the study door and stepped into the hall just as Aisha appeared with a plate of sliced cucumber and tomatoes. We stared at each other. Her eyes slid over me the way people do with strangers they're deciding whether to be polite to. "Can I help you?" she said, firm and confused. "My apologies," I said. "I was looking for the bathroom." "Back there," she pointed with the plate. Her posture said she owned this space and she was used to men backing up out of her rooms. "Thank you," I said, and moved as if I belonged to the floor plan. At the kitchen door, I paused. Zane and Nita sat at the table, arguing about something that mattered only for now. Horace clapped a hand to get them quiet. He looked past me and looked through me. The scar on his lip tugged. I left through the back, locked the door, and eased the gate open to my side of the night. Unit 22 at 3rd and Alder had been there since before I could grow a mustache. Inside, men had stored post-divorce couches and bands' failed dreams and the extra furniture of lives that thought more space was on the way. I had no money for first month, last month deposit, but my mother had. Quietly, in a world where she was outvoted, she had rented a unit and fed it a monthly fee like a pet on behalf of her forgotten son. The key slid without hesitation. The door rolled up without complaint. A low smell of old paper and motor oil came out to greet me. Under a blue tarp was my motorcycle, the one I had bought with the money I told the court I never had. It was the color of a simple sky. I pulled the tarp back and put my hand on the tank to feel if some heartbeat lived in metal. Beside it sat 3 boxes labeled in her hand. Photos, letters, evidence. Evidence. I carried that one to the strip of light and opened it. Inside, manila envelopes, a tape recorder, 3 USB drives, and a folder labeled Rashid Accident. The case that sent me away had been called an accident by the witness everyone chose to believe. I had called it a fight I didn't start, but was too proud to stop. A man named Rashid died. I agreed to manslaughter so the lawyers could eat. I agreed to 20 years because my public defender owed the calendar an offering. I opened the folder. Inside, a copy of a police report I had never seen, photos of bruises on my face I had forgotten, and a handwritten timeline matching my mother's terrible insomnia, all the hours she had spent in the year after I went away, assembling as best she could a story with no good ending. Clipped to the last page was a note. He lied. Find Navid. Navid. The name Horace had said at the table about a meeting. I found a USB labeled CityCam 17 and a sticky note, watch, 202 to 212. I slid it into the pocket of the jean jacket that didn't belong to any era and pulled the tarp further off the motorcycle. The battery would be dead, the tires would be low, the chain would be thirsty. If a machine sits in the dark for 20 years, it doesn't forget how to be itself, but it likes to be reminded. I lifted the seat and checked the little toolkit. Missing a screwdriver. Classic. I rummaged the crate behind the bike and found one plus a cheap battery tester. The numbers told me what I already knew. I rolled the bike out into the alley and let the air see it again. Then I went back into the locker and pulled out the other 2 boxes. I opened the one labeled photos first. My mother had collected not only our family shots, but clippings from the local paper of my arrest, my sentencing. She had highlighted certain lines, witness statements that sounded too similar to be honest, the same sentences attributed to different mouths, the kind of detail you only notice when someone's life depends on a comma. The letters box held envelopes returned to sender. The address? This house. The handwriting? Mine. I had written every week for the first year, then every month for the next 3. Each one was stamped undeliverable, as if the postal service had decided to side with my family. At the bottom of the box was a letter from my mother, unsent, apology folded into apology like origami. She had written, "They believe forgiveness came when we erased you. They're stubborn. I taught them to be. I forgot stubbornness is good at erasing." Behind the letters box was a metal lockbox. The key to it dangled on a string tied to the handle. Inside were cash, hundreds and 50s folded in bands, and a cheap burner phone with a dead battery. The kind of kit you leave for someone you love who needs to run or who needs to come back from running. I sat on the crate and let the lid of the unit cast a long shadow at my feet. A storage locker is a chapel to deferred decisions. My mother had put a pew in here for me and set prayers on the shelf. I took the USB to a cousin who worked in a phone repair shop and who still liked me because we had shared the kind of childhood secrets that survive adult morality. He slid the drive into his computer and pulled up the file. We watched the fuzzy footage together, the street outside the club where I had bled on a curb, the freeze-frame world of bad night cameras. At exactly 2:06 a.m., a car pulled to the curb. The license plate was clear. the way clocks sometimes are when you don't want them to be. Two men got out. One was the witness who said I swung first. The other was a politician's aide who later changed jobs to the city planning department. He was 15 years younger in the footage, but the face was the same. I knew it because I had seen it an hour earlier, framed on my brother's wall, laughing with him at a barbecue. Naveed. He had been there before the fight, had spoken to the witness, had put his hand on Rashid's shoulder like men do when they are about to negotiate or provoke. 10 minutes later, after the fight, he reappeared in the edge of the frame with the witness. They spoke. They got into the car. They left. They did not call an ambulance. When the ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, I was handcuffed to the bumper of a police car, trying not to vomit. My cousin paused the video and whistled. "You could do something with this." "I don't want to do something," I said. "I want to do the right thing." He looked at me the way family looks when they want to keep you from being who you are. "Brother, the right thing is a dance nobody's invited you to in a long time." I copied the file to a fresh drive and left. On the corner, I watched a city that had gently switched out its bones while I was away. New cafe where the tire shop used to be. Same old man arguing with a pigeon. The bland speech of luxury where there used to be swearing. Somewhere, my brother worked with a man who had been in the alley behind my sentencing. Somewhere, my mother had set an appointment for Friday at 2 like a flare. I needed to see where the flare would be. 4. The kitchen timer. I spent Thursday learning the rhythm of the house from the outside. I figured out when Aisha left for work and which route she preferred, the one with the bakery that gave your car a warm smell. I counted the minutes between Zane's bus and Nita's piano teacher's old sedan. I learned that Horace took a run at 6 and that he stopped at the same corner to stretch because the city had installed a little mural there and he liked to stand in front of it like a guardian. Then I broke into my own house again. You can feel righteous the first time. The second time is just a habit. This time, I brought with me a small DIY kit that any handyman in the trades would recognize. A headlamp, a multi-bit screwdriver, a roll of painter's tape, a small battery-powered motion sensor, and a couple of neodymium magnets, and a kitchen timer. If a thriller ever taught me anything beyond how to keep from being bored in the evenings, it's that the difference between fear and control is often a handful of small, dumb tools. I installed the motion sensor at the top of the back stairs, not to spy, but to learn pattern. It would log when people went up and down. I stuck a magnet under the desk's return air vent to listen to air currents. A change in airflow tells you when a door has been opened and closed often. I set the kitchen timer to ding 3 minutes after the study door closed, my little alarm to know if someone was arranging their day to avoid terrain I wanted to cross. You do not need expensive surveillance to know a house. You need curiosity and painter's tape to track doors that stick when it rains. Then I sat at the kitchen table because I had earned it. I poured water from the glass jug my mother had bought at a yard sale when she thought we needed to drink more, and then placed my hands flat on the table the way she used to when she needed us to listen. Aisha came home first. She didn't see me at first because she was finishing a phone call and setting down her keys and kicking off her flats and picking up the mail in the same practiced loop. Then she looked up. Her face went still and then set. "What are you doing in my house?" she asked. "Waiting," I said. My voice surprised me by how even it was. "For my brother." "You were told to leave," she said. "I wasn't told why." She put her phone down on the counter like placing a small shield in reach. "You cannot be here. I know I can't, but I need you to let me for 5 minutes. Then I'll go. I'll wait to come back until Friday at 2. That last part pricked her eyebrows. "What's Friday at 2? I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or caution. "That's what I'm here to find out," I said. The back door opened and Horace came in with a gust of outside and the smell of a person who had been relieved not to be inside. He froze the same instant she did when he saw me at the table. His scar tugged his mouth a millimeter toward a snarl. Then he did the thing our father taught us. Breathe before you decide who you are. Get out, he said. I slid a Polaroid across the table. My mother and 2 boys on the front steps with a birthday cake. If you want, I'll leave and never come back, and I'll pretend I didn't find out that you spend your life asking a city to remember its promises while your own house forgets its people. But before I go, you should know something. He didn't reach for the photo. He reached for Aisha's hand. He always had been better at holding on to the right thing than I was. I said the name like a fuse. Navid. Nothing moves slower than a person trying to keep their face from changing. City planning, I said. Old friend? I let the question hang like a jacket on a chair. He was there the night Rashid died. Before, after. He spoke to the witness who said I threw the first punch. Horace blinked very slowly. Then he did that little smile that means you're going to be told the hardest thing in an easy voice. Do you know what it sounds like when someone comes back after 20 years and starts throwing names around like tools at a job site? It sounds like the truth trying to do push-ups, I said. I have footage. Of what? His tone made the word a fist. Of him there, of a pattern. Aisha had moved to Horace's shoulder. She wasn't humming now. You think we haven't already worn these roads into our minds? She asked. You think we erased you because we made ourselves feel better? We erased you because you made it impossible not to. We built a family inside a hole. The timer on the counter dinged. 3 minutes. The study door closed. No one had opened it again. I could trust my 2-minute window to move later without bumping into anyone's private plans. Horace's chest rose and fell. He helped, he said. Finally, and the simplicity of those 2 words reorganized the air. He helped after. He helped make sure Mum kept the house when Dad died. He made sure permitting went through for this addition. He gestured to the back half of the house. When you were gone, he was here. He was a decent man when we needed one. Decent men don't stand in alleys and watch people climb into cars instead of ambulances, I said. You don't know what he watched. You know what a camera did. Cameras are better at not forgetting than people are, I said. Aisha looked at my face the way people look at a painting they're trying to decide if they like. What do you want? To not be erased, I said. To understand Friday at 2. At that, a small motion moved over Horace's face like weather. Friday at 2, he said. Mum's door. Which one? The old one, he said, where she grew up. The house at 154? He nodded. She goes every Friday. She doesn't always know why anymore. My mouth filled with cotton. Is she not well? He said. We didn't want you to know like this. How would I have known any other way? I asked, not unkindly. You took my letters and fed them to the storage unit. To their credit, they both looked hurt by that. Good. Hurt is a doorway if you let it be. Aisha cleared her throat. 5 minutes are up, she said. But it wasn't hard. For what it's worth, we didn't erase you because we hate you. She looked at the Polaroid on the table. We erased you because sometimes remembering feels like the opposite of surviving. I get that. But survival that requires amnesia isn't living. It's a pose. She half smiled, despite herself. You sound like an urban planning textbook. God help me, I said, and she almost laughed. I stood, tucking the note and the drive deeper into my jacket. I'll be at 154 on Friday at 2. If you want me to be part of the thing that happens there, say the word. If not,
I'll stand across the street and practice forgetting." Horace's jaw worked. Then he surprised me. He said, "Bring whatever you have. The thing about decent men, Habib, is that they know which side of a camera they prefer to stand on. If you're right, I'd like to stop being wrong." We looked at each other for the count of 3. It had been 2 decades since we'd been on the same team. It felt like borrowing someone else's shoes and having them fit. I left before I could ruin it. 5. Friday at 2. The house at 154 looked smaller, the way houses do after you've learned how big the world is. The paint was a determined beige. The bougainville was a furious pink. My mother had grown up behind those bricks and had left that house with my father and 4 boxes and the ability to turn cheap rice into something you scraped the pot of. When she opened the door, she was both herself and not herself. "Habib," she said, and my name poured out of her like tea in a cup she had been holding steady a long time. Then she blinked and said, "You're late for class," in the same breath, and patted my cheek to smooth down a count.
I spent the next weeks doing all of that. The petition was filed. A judge with half a soft spot for heiress let the review proceed. The city planning file with the not bribe and the relocation paperwork went to a journalist who insisted on using the phrase systemic, and I didn't stop him because it felt good in my mouth. Naveed sent an email that walked the line between apology and self-preservation so gracefully that I briefly hated him, then decided he had earned his carefulness like any other man who had watched a thing die and then went home to dinner. At home, the erasure peeled back in layers, not like tape, but like onion skin, slow, with tears. The photos on the stairs were adjusted to include a few old frames and a new arrangement. My Polaroids found a corner. The wall didn't protest. Aisha and I installed a shelf in the study together. She measured, I leveled. We did not talk about forgiveness. We talked about weight rating and anchors and the way cheap drywall lies. The shelf held a row of books, one of which was my mother's address book with the password Peonies 3 on the M page. We did not label the shelf ours. We just let it be there and we put things on it. Zayn taught me the new rules of soccer, which, to my old brain, were not rules at all, but chaos disguised as exercise. Nita played a song at the piano at 154, and then one day I came home and the cheap instrument was in our living room, and the sound it made was the middle of the world again. My mother's hands were not the ones that played. Sometimes she forgot we had a piano. Sometimes she sat with her eyes closed while Nita's fingers moved and I watched her mouth because memory often returns to the lips before it reaches the eyes. Horace and I ran together at 6 in the morning. We stretched at the mural corner and said nothing because men are sometimes allowed to choose silence as the correct tool. He told me eventually, in a voice used to test an old floor for creak, that he had erased me on purpose because rage made him. He told me he was sorry that his rage had been so tidy. I told him my rage had never been tidy and I was trying to learn the trick. We changed the porch light back to a warm bulb. The moths found it. It felt ridiculous how much that mattered. When the review board finally issued its letter, it did exactly what Naveed had said it would. It apologized to its own shadow. It vacated my sentence on a procedural irregularity so technical it sounded like a math problem. It named no villains and offered no ceremony. I went to the clerk's office to get the paper stamped, and the clerk stamped it with a face like she was sealing a container that would be stored at a reasonable temperature for a reasonable amount of time. I walked out into a city that had moved on, and for the first time since the gate didn't remember my boots, I believed I could walk with it. I went home. I opened the gate. It swung without complaint. I had oiled it yesterday because that is what you do to hinges that fail you. You do not punish them. You teach them to move again. On the porch, my mother sat with a blanket over her knees because Aisha had decided the air was unfair to old bones. My mother looked up at me, and for a second, she was my mother like a flash from a camera. "You missed the bus," she said. And then, so soft, I almost missed it, "but you made it." I sat beside her and took her hand. Behind the glass, on the hall wall, a new photo hung among the others. My brother and me on the front steps, each holding a side of a cake that had no candles because we could not agree how old we were supposed to be. Inside the house, a timer dinged 3 minutes after the study door closed, and I smiled because some habits are just stories we tell ourselves about how to be ready for visitors. I got up to turn it off. On my way, I paused to straighten the frame with our photo. It was tilted by the breath of the house. I leveled it with my hand and stepped back and let the wall hold it. If you ask me now whether I forgave anyone, I will tell you the truth I learned with a screwdriver. Forgiveness is not a word you say to a person. It is a job you do to a hinge so the door can move again. Sometimes it squeals anyway. You oil it more. You keep moving it until the sound becomes the sound of a house that remembers the names of its people when they knock. And if you ask me whether I believe I am still the forgotten son, I will say this. There are days the house calls me by every name but mine. On those days, I write my name on painter's tape and stick it to something that matters, a shelf, a photo, a kitchen timer. And then I go for a run with my brother, and we stretch at the corner, and the mural watches us not say the right things. On nights when my mother forgets who I am, I play the 3 chords she taught us both when we were small, and I play them badly, and she laughs like a person who is exactly where she's supposed to be. On mornings when I am brave, I oil the gate again, even though it does not need it, because I want it to never again learn how to say no to my footsteps. There is a brass key on my mother's note that I keep on my ring. I do not know what it opens anymore. It may open a version of us I will never reach. It may open a storage locker whose rent I will forget to pay on purpose. It may open nothing. I keep it because sometimes the thing that keeps you from being erased isn't the door you open, but the weight in your pocket that tells you belong to a house that can still be made to remember. This is how to build a life after the blueprint burns. You square your lines by the light that remains. You fasten to the studs of Friday at 2. You let a decent man help you, even if he was indecent enough to forget his courage 20 years ago. You teach a hinge to move. You write your name on tape and you knock again. And when the door opens, even if the person behind it says, "Can I help you?" like you are a stranger, you say your name. And if they don't believe it, you go around back, and you oil what squeaks, and you sit at the kitchen table with your hands flat and wait for your brother to come home. And when he does, you tell him you brought biscuits. Because even the forgotten son knows. Every house has a language. You learn to speak it, and you teach it your name.